Well, good afternoon, everybody, for another episode of the 9/11 storyline here. We have Rabbi Meir Kahane that we're going to talk about today. And with us today, of course, is my co-host, Leonardo Salvaggio, 9/11 researcher, author, blogger, writer. Leo, you chose this one. I thought this was a fantastic storyline to talk about today because he's actually forgotten about today, Leo.
Yeah, this is what something that I propose because people think that this is a murder case. People think that this is true crime. This is not true crime. This is terrorism because this is the first attack by Al Qaeda on the American soil. So this is very important if we want to understand 9/11.
Yeah, and also too, it leads directly into the episode of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, El Sayyid Nosair and his background, as well as the background of Rabbi Meir Kahane and the JDL. And by the way, both of these groups actually still exist today and are well, with the JDL being a little bit more prominent because actually some members of the JDL and the Kahanis group are now within the Israeli government as well. The Egyptian Islamic Jihad still exists today. And so here on the 9/11 report, we're going to be talking about Rabbi Meir Kahane. And to give you a little bit about a background regarding Meir Kahane, for those who don't know, tend to forget who are young, Meir Kahane was also known as Rabbi Mayor David Coher Kahane, who was a Jewish rabbi and founded the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, which was founded upon the stated primary goal, which is the to protect Jews from anti-Semitism by any means necessary. And if that sounds familiar, that's what Malcolm X would used to say regarding the African Americans and their civil rights movement. But the JDL is a far right wing political group. It is considered a hate group by the FBI and the Southern Poverty Law Center even today. But Kahane was born here in Flatbush, Brooklyn. In fact, he used to live not too far from when I used to live in Brooklyn. And he was born in 1932. And from there, he began his education at a yeshiva in Flatbush and followed the works of earlier Zionists like Zev Jabotinsky, who was a Zionist revisionist and founded the Jewish Self-Defense Organization in Russia. And actually, Kahane received his rabbinical ordination from the Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn. And in 1954, he actually was a very memorable orator. He used to give out lectures on the streets about Jewish supremacy, and the FBI caught notice of him because he was a staunch anti-communist. And so at that time, Leo, the FBI and the State Department were staunch opponents for communism and considered communism the greatest threat to American democracy. And Kahane became a quote unquote consultant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and his task actually was to infiltrate the John Birch Society and report back his findings with his handlers. In fact, Kahane, when he joined the Birch group, his name was Michael King, and he would always dress up as if he was a moderate Christian. And he actually won the trust of board members within the Koch party. Um, Following his position as he grew up to the Koch party, he became an ultra nationalist. And through that, he became very immersed in Israeli politics. Now, in essence, back then, Israeli politics have been exceptionally detrimental to achieving a sole Jewish state because they believed in a two-state solution. And Kahane long understood he was a target by the Mossad for his very staunch position, aggressive position for a two-state solution. And Israel government back then, under the centrist mindset, was considered Kahane just too radical and labeled him a terrorist. And even though he was Israeli and he was Jewish and he was an ordained rabbi, he actually used to, when he used to visit Israel, would have a hard time entering the country, even though they couldn't ban him back then. That would come later. Um, so, following his position within the Koch party, he became an ultra nationalist within the Knesset and then founded the Koch party in 1971. when he immigrated to Israel finally. And the Koch party actually only lasted, I think, 20 years because it was actually disbanded in the early 90s. I forgot the year, but the Koch party was aimed at the sole goal of what Rabbi Meir Kahane always wanted, which was Israel to be a Jewish state only, with the forced expulsion of all the Palestinians. Um, and show, Kahane was basically um, a radical within uh, the John Birch Society, and then later became a radical within the Koch party, had a prominent seat within the Knesset, but was considered a radical by even the Israeli government. And so this mindset, which grew to the attention of a very few people, because Israel was not as far right as they are now. So he did win the popular vote within, say, the ultra Orthodox sect of Israel, but they weren't a prominent seat then. That wasn't until later when they put on and gained more influence. But Kahane continued to be interviewed by American pundits here in the States in the throughout the 70s, all the way until the late 80s, where he would propose his stance and they would considered him to be basically almost a lunatic. And he would come under fire for his points of view regarding how Israel should be a Jewish state only. And so, the plans were in works about him having to be deported out of Israel. But that didn't come yet because, for what we know, his next meeting was on November 5th of 1990. And he was to be at a meeting where he would give a lecture in a hotel. And Leo, what went on the night of June 5th, on November 5th, 1990?
Well, so Adam, first off, I have to say that what I wrote this morning was that it was November 6th, but it
November
doesn't
6th.
matter.
Oh, yes,
Ah,
correct.
okay,
Thank
that's
you.
correct.
Thank
Okay.
you, by the way. Thank you.
It was November 6th, 1990. So what happens is that he was given a speech, as you said, in Lexington Avenue, 525 Lexington Avenue. For those familiar with Manhattan, this is Midtown. So it's pretty much between the Empire State Building and Central Park, that area. Okay. Well, we also have the Chrysler Building, the Madison Square Garden, and the United Nations.
Hmm.
And so what happens is that he was giving a speech, and after his speech, he was sitting down and answering questions from people who were coming over to him. And at a certain point, someone approaches him from behind, this guy, this Egyptian guy by the name of El Sayyid Nosair, and he shoots him twice, missing him with the second bullet, but hitting him in the face or in the cheek somehow from behind with his first bullet. This guy was 34 years old. And of course, he has to rush for his life because people were after him. And what happens while he's going away is that a staff member of Kahane's tried to stop him, and this guy also gets shot. We're talking about a 73-year-old person by the name of Irving Franklin, and he was hit in the leg. And so when he got to the streets, when Nosair got to the streets, he tried to commandeer a taxi, but a postal police officer who was nearby tried to intervene and to stop him. This guy by the name of Carlos Acosta also got shot
Yes.
by Nosair, but he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Now, I think that here we have to understand and to underline that in movies you see that bulletproof vests are like magic. Okay, no, while you're invincible while wearing that. That's not the case in reality because it stops the bullet from entering your body, but it doesn't take away the energy. Therefore, it's very common,
Right.
for instance, to be knocked on the ground, or also broken bones are very common in that cases. So we have this Carlos Acosta police officer who, after being shot, is able to shoot back. So this guy's a hero. because what he did is really marvelous because he was shot and he was able to shoot back. And by shooting back in Nosair, he actually stops him because now Nosair is caught. So we have four people being taken to the hospital because we have Meir Kahane, we have his staff member Franklin, we have the police officer Acosta, and we have the terrorist, the attacker himself. What happens at the hospital is that, of course, Meir Kahane is declared dead around 10 o'clock at night on that day. And this is, in a nutshell, the story of the attack itself.
Yeah, you know what's funny about that, Leo, and you're well known about the incident itself, was that they were both taken to Bellevue, and actually, um, they were in the emergency room where doctors are attending both of them at the same time. Actually, El Sayyid Nosair being wounded, and the mortally wounded Kahani almost like feet away from him, and it was a very hectic scene, actually. So what the I think what the NYPD did immediately afterwards with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, by the way, was they actually found out El Saidno's address, which is located in Jersey City, New Jersey. So the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force also found out that El Said Nosair had been monitored by the FBI long before that at the Masjid Al Salam in Jersey. And he was also a member of the Al Farouk Mosque in Brooklyn and was also a devout follower of the one and only Gemma Islamia radical Omar Abdel Rahman, who is also known as the Blind Sheikh, and for his ties to terrorist activity in Egypt and the United States, being with the Landmarks plot. Now El Sayed Nosair was being charged with the murder of Rabbi Meir Kahane, and basically was being interviewed in the hospital with Kahane's, laying right next to him, and El Sayed Nosair was heard mumbling something to an NYP detective, but he couldn't make it out what he was saying. So while that was going on, Leo, here's the Joint Terrorism Task Force, here's the FBI. They go to El Sayed Nosair's New Jersey apartment. And if I'm correct, and I'm going to give credit to DJ Thermal Detonator, who found out the apartment number. And one of the very few people, along with Paul Thompson, know about this is 40 Parampo Avenue. I'm sorry if I said it wrong. I think it's Parampo Avenue. It's in New Jersey. In the apartment itself are two individuals, Mahmoud Abalima and Mohammed Salame. And for those who are familiar with those names, they are involved with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. But it wasn't so much that these two individuals were found in the home, Leo. It was what they found inside the house, inside the apartment, which were thousands of rounds of ammunition, maps and drawings of New York City landmarks, including the World Trade Center. There were documents in Arabic containing bomb making formulas and the mention of the term Al Qaeda on one of them, recorded sermons by Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, in which he encouraged his followers to destroy what he called the edifices of capitalism by destroying their high-rise buildings. They also found tape-recorded phone conversations of El Sayed Nosair and Abdul Rahman about paramilitary training and discussing bomb-making manuals, and videotape talks of a certain Egyptian radical delivered at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare's Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You know him, Leo, and for those who know what I'm talking about in the know, it's Ali Muhammad. There were also top secret manuals for Fort Bragg that were even classified. So who do you think put that stuff there? It wasn't El Sayed Nosair, it wasn't Mahmoud Abalima, and it wasn't Mohammed Salame. It was Ali Muhammad. Ali Muhammad's known to be a triple agent for Al Qaeda, the FBI, and the CIA. And I found that to be really interesting, Leo, because the connection with the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane leads into a branch out effect. And if you wanted to add a little bit more to it, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's worth mentioning that, of course, he was charged with murder, but it was only convicted of shooting Acosta, the police officer, and
Crazy.
possession of illegal firearm. This is crazy. He could not be
Yeah.
convicted of the murder of Meir Kahane because Kahane's family did not authorize the postmortem examination. Therefore, they could not assess
Oh,
which
good point.
bullet killed him. I'm not
Point.
sure if this is for religious reasons. I don't know, but the reality is that no autopsy was conducted on that body. Therefore, the guy was not convicted for the murder of Meir Kahane. But while he was in jail, something even weirder happened because
Mm,
the blind sheikh was plotting to attack the jail itself with a truck bomb in order to
right.
make the guy escape.
Right.
That's what they found during the 1993 World Trade Center bombing investigation. And here we start seeing links between Nosair and Al Qaeda. And
Yeah.
then we can also add that at the end, sorry for interrupting you,
Yeah.
but
Go
let me
ahead.
get
Go
to
ahead.
this, let me get to the end of it. Within that trial against the blind sheik for the World Trade Center bombing, the first one, of course, Nosair was actually convicted of the murder of Meir Kahane by a federal court. So in the end, it was convicted even without the post-mortem authorization. I just wanted to get to the end of it.
Oh, dude, I can't believe that. Like, I still can't believe that he wasn't charged with the. It was obvious he killed him. Right? People saw him, and he's running outside. And by the way, when you brought up the point about him going into the cab, it was Mahmoud Abalima was supposed to be waiting outside in a cab, waiting for El Sayyid Nosair, but he drove around the block, and El Sayyid Nosair actually went into a cab, uh, and it wasn't Mahmoud Abalina, and he ran out. That's when he ran into Acosta. But that's amazing, Leo, that he wasn't charged with the murder of Kahana, and it brought up the ire of the JDL, and they used to protest outside the police station for that. Also, the NYPD detectives who were assigned to the assassination found that Ali Muhammad was given weapons training to El Said Nosair, Mahmoud Abalina, Mohammed Salameh, and others at um, the Calverton shooting range in Long Island with that famous picture, the showing them coming out. And that 3 days later, the New York Police Department's chief detective at the time was Borelli. I forgot his name, first name, but Borelli um, would declare that the shooting was the result of a lone gunman. We talked about this before we pressed record. Was that the evidence of a large Arab terrorist cell was unfounded? And you would think, with all the evidence that was found in El Saido's apartment, would show you that there's a wider conspiracy and there's a burgeoning problem of Arab fundamentalist groups operating inside the United States. The I don't know, the declaration of all this was shocking, to say the least, because even with the evidence collected from the Jersey apartment of El Said Nasser alone would contradict the statement made by Pirelli itself. But, I believe the lawyer that was representing Kahane was that civil rights lawyer, William Kunstler, who, I'm sorry, the lawyer for El Said Nasser. And Kunstler was not an unknown. He was actually a radical lawyer noted here in New York. I'm very familiar with him. He had a penchant for going against the grain and immediately came under fire by the JDL. But like you said, Nosair was found not guilty of Connie's murder in December of 91. And that Nosair on January 29th, 1992, was convicted for the guns charge, but the judge gave him the max. I think it was like 7 years or 7 to 20 years, which was the maximum allowed under that sentence. And the connection to Omar Abdel Rahman was never recognized, not by the NYPD or the FBI until after after the bombing of the World Trade Center in '93. And by the way, Leo, the all that boxes of evidence, I think it was like over 30, 40 boxes of evidence collected at Nosair's house, was stored away and inaccessible, even to the prosecutors and to the investigators of the case. Why? The documents actually would not be found until after the bombing of the World Trade Center. And the evidence was not translated of a large scale Islamist operation, which was indeed well founded. And many, I believe, this is coming from John Miller's book, To Sell. And that, when I remember it, was that many people within the NYPD, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, began to suspect that the FBI was not really fully cooperating with the Joint Terrorism Task Force about this large cell that was operating inside the United States. So if you wanted to add a little bit more to it, you go right ahead there, Leo.
I think that what is worth mentioning is that in the 90s, for reasons that are probably obvious, the FBI has a different mindset because they were not so much into terrorism as they are now, because that was pre 9/11. And I remember reading in that same book that, for instance, this cell was underrated because the FBI, especially in New York, was long distracted by the case of TW800, which I've covered extensively, both on my YouTube channel and on my blog. And that was not terrorism. That was just an unfortunate happenstance. That was an accident. But the period in which that happened, that was during the 1996 Olympics. And also there was a trial against a terrorist. I don't remember by heart who that guy was in that same period in New York. And also conflicting eyewitnesses' account brought for a long period the FBI to think that that was terrorism. Therefore, the FBI, all the bureau in all the United States and especially New York got distracted. But I mean, of course, today we can say that that was an intelligence mistake. But I'm not sure we would have said the same in 1996 when that happened, because everyone thought that if that was terrorism, they had to make sure.
Yeah, if I remember that guy, man, you brought up an old memory. If I remember that guy in '96, the Richard Jewell, that was the guy's name.
Yeah.
They said he was a terrorist, right? You brought up an awesome point, by the way, in regards to the FBI not recognizing the threat, because in 1990, and I remember this specifically, was that the primary objective was to take John Gotti down at the time. So a lot of the FBI was concentrating on the La Cosa Nostra problem here in New York. And I think this is a great salient point that you raised, because they didn't really know much about Arab fundamentalism. It wasn't until 1993 and years afterwards they made the DI-49 task force, which was, years later. But nevertheless, until John O'Neill came, from Chicago in the mid 90s. But nevertheless, yeah, I probably have to agree with you that this was basically just that the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the NYPD were basically just, ignorant regarding this problem. But I do find it really fascinating at the same time, Leo, and I think you know the name of the fireman regarding his close affiliation with covering El Sayyid Nosair's trial, as well as Ramzi Youssef, and that's Ronald Bucha. Ronald Bucha actually was at the World Trade Center in 1993 and took a very great investment into following the trial of the 93 bombers. And even he used to have posters in his garage of like connections between El Sayyid Nosair and Abdul Rahman, to Ali Muhammad, to Ramzi Youssef, and to the co-conspirators of the Landmarks plot, and even, had certain people within the NYPD who knew him took interest, but they never really gave it any serious consideration. Again, it goes back to your point that here you have, investigators in the early onset not recognizing the threat right away. But going back to Kahane, again, you brought up a great point too before we press record about Kahane. There are no good guys in this story, right? Kahane was a radical fundamentalist, for the Jewish radical group, the JDL. El Sayyid Nosair, part of the, Al Jihad group in Egypt, and it basically offsets. But this is the first terrorist attack inside the United States that people tend to forget, and this actually introduces the new threat to the international community, and that is radical fundamentalism groups. And what can we take away from this story, Leo, in the end?
I think that, as we said before we started recording, usually what we've been talking about in our previous episodes, we had terrorists attacking innocent people. In this case, we have bad guys against even more bad guys, if that's the right way to say that in English. Because Meir Kahane was a radical, and the Jewish Defense League that he founded was declared a terrorist organization by the FBI. And as you mentioned, his party, Catch, was also declared illegal in Israel because they didn't disband because they didn't get along anymore, but it was disbanded because it was declared illegal because of their very extremist positions. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that we only knew the real truth about this case after 9/11 because it was the 9/11 investigators who found out that Osama bin Laden paid for the defense of Nosair, and that Nosair's families were also fundraisers for Al Qaeda. Therefore, we had very strict connections. And also after 9/11, Nosair himself made a confession in which he stated that he did not act alone, and he made the names of people that you already mentioned, Bilal al-Qaizi and Mohammed Salameh. And the first one, al-Qaizi, is from Jordan and he's an Al-Qaeda member. Therefore, the connections between the two are very strict. And I also remember reading in an article by Peter Lenz that while planning the attack on Meir Kahane, they also evaluated different scenarios. And one of the other scenarios involved that Nosair had to make surveillance on an airport to see if they could strike Kahane while he was at the airport. And he did that with an Al-Qaeda member by the name of Ephron Gilmore, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who's an associate of Osama bin Laden. I'm not a great fan of Peter Lenz because I think that he makes great reporting but sometimes he follows his bias a little bit too much. But in this case, his reporting is outstanding because he found out that, he's great, but he's not one of my favorites, okay? It's not Lawrence Wright or anybody else. He's a great guy, just not one of the top. And I think that in this case, his reporting is great because he actually assessed that Nosair was connected with Al-Qaeda, but that, again, was overlooked. This is also a great case of intelligence mistake. But again, we don't want to blame anybody. I mean, we're talking about it 30 years plus after that happened.
Just to add to that too, the connection to Ali Muhammad can't be overlooked is because Ali Muhammad was passed around. He's actually collecting intelligence about, Dr. Omar Abdul Rahman and bin Laden. Showed his loyalty to bin Laden, actually was a fervent follower of their Salafist jihadist views. But the FBI kept him on, knowing full well that he's inside the United States, operating at free will almost. The CIA is collecting intelligence from him. Meanwhile, Ali Muhammad's allegedly connected to, a couple of terrorist operations, including the 98 East Africa bombings, where he took photographs of the security areas around the embassies themselves, allegedly gave training to some of the 9/11 hijackers about hijacking the planes or how to take control of the planes. And this guy just basically disappears. So the story of Sayyid Nosair, he's still alive. His son actually does lectures, I think, who denounces his father's actions. Ali Muhammad disappears. Sayyid Nosair's for doing, forever prison terms, along with Mahmoud Abuliman, Mohammed Salameh, and the others from the 93 bombing. And then you have basically the groups themselves. So I want to get your final thoughts on this too. It's interesting to note that the two radical groups that were started under this idea of fundamentalism, you have the Kahanists, who back then were nobodies, but now they're basically some people given high positions in the Israeli government. And then you have the U.S. backing of radical fundamentalists, especially in Syria, now with Abu Muhammad Jalani as the president of Syria, who today a U.S. special envoy to the U.S. compared him to George Washington. Are we going to see a prominent rise in terrorism regarding these groups, Leo, or is this a case of now, again, the ignorance by U.S. intelligence and foreign intelligence as well, giving rise to these radical fundamentalist groups?
I wish I knew, Adam. I think that geopolitics is very complex, and that most of the times you don't choose your allies. Because we know that in the 90s, in the 90s, the U.S. were allied with Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and that probably some of those weapons were stolen. And that's the same thing that happened 4 years ago when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban were able to steal some of the weapons. I know for sure because I've spoken to people who were in Afghanistan that the US forces try to disable some of those weapons, but of course, you can disable something, you cannot disable everything. You can disable cars, but you cannot disable rifles, just to make an example. So I wish I knew, and I just think that who is taking this decision are doing that in their best way possible, but we're humans and we all make mistakes. So I really wish I knew more about this, but this is as far as I can get.
I know it's a very complex question itself, and it has a lot to do with like basically deliberate intentions, and one that just basically was ignorance itself, and you really can't tell. It's just like it's so twisted. But Leo, you've covered the Connie story for a long time now. And you're one of the few, basically, that has written about Kahane. Very few people write about it. You bring up Peter Lance, of course, he's done extensive work on Lawrence Wright, Thomas Friedman. But the story in itself is basically the epicenter of the rise of radical fundamentalism. What was I'm going to give you the last word here. What about this it's this period of time can we take away now that is more prominent now than it was then? I mean, like, it is radical fundamentalism more important now than it was then? And can it be a danger to us once again, or maybe not?
Well, I think that yes, fundamentalism is much more a thing today than it was in 1990. That's for sure. And so today we see crazy things such as attacks against Jews for no reason other
Hmm.
than for them being Jews. Okay, so it's quite funny that we're talking about the murder of Meir Kahane in a period where anti-Semitism is growing again in the United States and everywhere. So I've covered on my YouTube channel the attacks with the flamethrower in Colorado and also the DC shootings at the Jewish History Museum. And if you think about it, those people were only attacked for the reason of allegedly being Jews. Because the reason why I'm saying allegedly is that after covering the shooting in DC for the first time, a friend of mine who lives in DC reached out to me and said, I knew the victim because he would come to the same parish as I go. So I said, excuse me, is that guy a Christian? And he said, yes, absolutely. The guy was a Christian. He was not a Jew. But he was Israeli and he was working for the Israeli embassy. So the killer got everything wrong. So yes, I do think that extremism is coming back. I think that also the world is seeing an unforeseen situation because social media are radicalizing people, and you and I use social media for doing useful things to spread the knowledge about these things. But there are a lot of people out there who use social media to radicalize people and to spread hate. So I think also that investigators and people trying to stop them are doing their best and they're doing that fine. But terrorists only have to succeed once, while law
Hmm.
enforcement have to succeed every time. So it's a complex future ahead.
Yeah, I happen to agree, and that the odds are stacked against us itself. But Leo, I'm glad we talked about this today because it's such a forgotten issue. It's a forgotten timeline in history. And right now, Leo, you're working on projects. Tell us about what's coming in the future for you and your channel.
Okay, yeah. So thanks for asking. So I would say check my channel next Wednesday. I should have a big guest. Okay, I don't want to say his
Oh,
name because, oh yeah, I'm not superstitious, not at all, but
okay.
you never know. Things might go or once in a while. I should have a big guest talking about the Saudi involvement on Wednesday. So check my channel back. Then for
Oh,
the anniversary, I'm working on a story of a survivor. And we're gonna have that as an article in written form. So that also gives me the opportunity to translate it to Italian. So it will be published both in its original version in English and in Italian. And I'm also trying to, well, I'm also extending my FAQ section on my website. And I also added recently the FAQs in English. I'm also working on extending that because I've been covering conspiracy theories. I've been covering the Saudi connection. I've been covering the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think that one thing that is missing in my FAQs is what are the main intelligence mistakes that led to 9/11. So this is what I'm
mm.
working on now.
Oh, wow, that's a lot you got there. Clay, I'm really excited about who this guy is on Wednesday. So, is he familiar to me or?
Yes, I'll tell you as soon as we
Yeah.
stop recording. So it's just between me and you. Yeah, you
Okay.
know the
All right.
guy.
All right, for sure. And as for me, I just scored my personally, most wanted interview, and it'll take place in August, late August, and it's going to be Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA, somebody that me and Richard we wanted as our first guest, but we couldn't contact him in time. So that I'm going to be working on other issues as well along the months. But Leo, listen, thanks a lot. This is our 10th episode, by the way. And really do enjoy doing these collaborations with you. And we've
Thanks.
gotten so much great feedback from it. And I'd love to continue doing this in the future every month. And thank you very much for having me on talk about this issue, Leo. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Adam. Thanks for your time.
All right, guys. Listen, see you in the next episode next month. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye bye.